Imagine walking away from one of the most powerful men on the planet. Not because you had to, but because you chose to. Years later, someone finally asked her one question. Do you regret leaving Michael Jordan? The room went silent. Because her answer wasn't what anyone expected. And it changed how people saw success forever. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Now, let's dive into what really happened. What if one simple question had the power to silence an entire room? Not because it was loud. Not because it was dramatic. But because of everything it carried beneath the surface. Years after the spotlight faded from their marriage, long after headlines moved on, someone finally asked a question many people had secretly wondered about. Do you regret leaving Michael Jordan? The moment felt heavy. The kind of moment where people stop breathing for a second. This wasn't just any name. Michael Jordan is more than a basketball icon. To the world, he represents unmatched success, discipline, wealth, and legacy. His name is often associated with greatness itself. For many, being connected to someone like that feels like winning life's ultimate prize. That's why the question came with assumptions. People assume that walking away from fame must come with regret. That leaving comfort must mean failure. That choosing a different path must eventually lead to second thoughts. So when his ex-wife was asked, most people expected a familiar response. A long pause. A careful smile. A diplomatic answer filled with hesitation. Maybe even regret. After all, society teaches us that success looks a certain way, and giving it up seems unthinkable. But what happened next challenged all of that. There was no nervous laugh. No emotional breakdown. No attempt to rewrite the past. Instead, her response carried a quiet confidence that instantly shifted the mood in the room. It wasn't loud, but it was powerful. Because sometimes, the most shocking answers aren't the dramatic ones. They're the honest ones. And what she said next caught everyone completely off guard, not because it was controversial, but because it questioned how we define happiness itself. Before the fame reached godlike levels, before the championships stacked up and the world began calling him the greatest, there was a private life that very few people ever truly saw. Michael Jordan was intensely focused. Relentless. Driven by a standard of excellence that almost no one else could match. That mindset didn't switch off when the game ended. The same discipline that pushed him to outwork everyone on the court followed him home. Long training hours turned into long absences. Pressure from competition blended into daily life. Travel schedules kept changing. Media attention never slowed down. Even moments meant for rest were filled with expectations. From the outside, it looked glamorous. Private jets. Luxury homes. Global admiration. But from the inside, it was exhausting. His ex-wife once stood beside a man the world celebrated, but she lived with someone who was rarely fully present. Not because he didn't care, but because greatness demanded everything he had. Success at that level leaves little room for stillness, and even less room for ordinary moments. Birthdays were missed. Quiet conversations were rushed. Personal space slowly disappeared under the weight of public life. Success demanded sacrifice. And not all sacrifices were visible to the cameras. She wasn't just married to a man. She was married to a mission, a lifelong pursuit of greatness that came before comfort, before balance, and sometimes before personal connection. Over time, that mission began to take more than it gave. What the world saw as dedication, she experienced as distance. What fans called passion, she felt as pressure. And slowly, the reality behind the legend became impossible to ignore. Because even the greatest success can feel empty. When it costs you presence, peace, and partnership, walking away from a marriage like that is never easy. It isn't just the end of a relationship. It means stepping away from a lifestyle, a public identity, and a future that most people would never dare to question. To the outside world, it looked like security, privilege, and comfort, something to hold on to at any cost. But inside, something was quietly shifting. Over time, a realization settled in, not all at once, but slowly, in small moments of silence, in long days of waiting, in the growing feeling of being unseen. She began asking herself a question that many people avoid because of how painful it can be. Am I living for myself, or am I slowly disappearing? Love was still there. Respect remained. History mattered. But love alone was no longer enough. Not when peace was missing. Not when emotional connection felt distant. Not when happiness seemed borrowed, dependent on circumstances rather than something she truly owned. The decision to leave wasn't dramatic or sudden. There was no single argument or breaking point. Instead, it was built over time, layer by layer, through quiet reflection and difficult honesty. It was slow. It was painful. And it was deeply private. When the marriage ended, the world responded the only way it knew how, with headlines, numbers, and speculation. Conversations focused on outcomes, not emotions. On public narratives, not personal cost. Very few people asked what it felt like to choose herself. Very few people asked how much courage it took to walk away from something everyone else thought she should keep. That's why, years later, when someone finally asked if she regretted leaving, the question carried more than curiosity. It carried the weight of a choice that had reshaped her entire life. And the answer, when it came, would surprise everyone. When the question finally came, the atmosphere changed. People leaned in, not out of curiosity alone, but expectation. Was this the moment of regret? Would she admit second thoughts? Would she wish she had stayed? There was a brief pause, but not the kind filled with uncertainty. It felt thoughtful, intentional. She didn't hesitate. Her answer was calm. Honest. Unemotional. She said she did not regret leaving. Not because the marriage lacked meaning. Not because the years together were unimportant. But because staying would have required her to slowly give up parts of herself she was no longer willing to lose. She spoke about happiness in a way that surprised many people listening. She explained that happiness is not measured by wealth, fame, or the power of the name you are connected to. Those things can create comfort, but they don't guarantee fulfillment. True happiness, she said, comes from peace. From self-respect. From the freedom to exist without constantly shrinking. Her words carried no bitterness. No resentment. No anger toward the past. Instead, they were grounded, shaped by reflection rather than emotion. She openly acknowledged the good moments they shared. She respected the history they built together and recognized the role that chapter played in her life. But she made one truth unmistakably clear. Choosing your well-being is never a mistake. That answer stunned people, not because it was dramatic, but because it quietly challenged one of society's strongest beliefs, that walking away from comfort must mean failure. Sometimes, it doesn't mean failure at all. Sometimes, it means survival. And sometimes, it means finally choosing to live fully, rather than simply staying where it's safe. Her response didn't just answer a question, it delivered a lesson. A lesson many people didn't realize they needed to hear. We often believe that having everything the world admires automatically leads to happiness. Fame. Wealth. Recognition. A life that looks perfect from the outside. But her story gently reminds us that external success does not always translate into inner fulfillment. You can have everything people envy and still feel empty. You can walk away from what looks perfect and finally feel whole. Her experience reveals something important: success looks very different from the inside. What appears glamorous on the surface can come with invisible pressure, constant expectation, and emotional cost. Behind every icon, every celebrated figure, there is a human story, one shaped by responsibility, sacrifice, and quiet struggles that rarely make headlines. But the most powerful message from her response is this: no amount of fame is worth losing your peace. No relationship is worth erasing who you are. These words resonate far beyond this one story. They speak to anyone who has ever stayed in a situation out of fear, comfort, or the expectations of others. They remind us that choosing yourself does not make you selfish, it makes you honest. People were stunned not because she walked away from a legend, but because she did so without apology. Without bitterness. Without needing approval. In a world obsessed with status, validation, and appearances, that kind of courage is rare. Her story encourages us to rethink what strength really looks like. Sometimes it's not about enduring at all costs. Sometimes it's about recognizing when something no longer aligns with who you are becoming. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't staying. It's knowing when to walk away and choosing a life that feels true to you.